Hey everyone, Ryan Young, Jiu-Jitsu. Hope you're doing well. So we've done a few videos on diet and different ways to eat and things that will help us that will benefit us in our training. Well, what I want to do is I want to share with you an individual whose book I read back in I think 2013 or so, because we're always looking for ways to increase our performance through diet, because that's probably one of the most important ways that we can. They say, like, with abs are 90% made in the kitchen, not in the gym. And so I somehow came across her book, and I don't know how, I don't recall that, but I remember reading it thinking, man, this is actually pretty fascinating, especially when you hear her story about where she comes from, her background and stuff. But let me introduce to you Lierre Keith, and her book is called The Vegetarian Myth. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So here we go. It's up to you.
Also, I'm introducing my great self. Says, eat the meat. So yeah, my story is I was a vegan for 20 years. I started doing that when I was 16, and I did it for almost 20 years straight through. I was extremely strict. I tried to do everything right. I was not one of those junk food vegans that eats potato chips and Oreos. I did not actually touch white sugar or white flour that entire time that I was a vegan. And every year that went by, something else went wrong with my body. Some of it was permanent, as it turns out. And of course, when you're in that world, it's impossible to question it. The problem with being a vegan is that it's not just what you eat. It really becomes who you are. So it becomes your identity. It's your whole sense of self. You're a vegan. And so you live in a world with other people exactly like that. And so it's like this little echo chamber. And once you're in that world, which can be very cult-like at times, it's impossible to question, to let in any other information from the outside about why this might not be the best thing. And when your health starts to decline, which it will, you have a very hard time trying to investigate what's actually wrong, because it's going to lead back to the fact that the diet is not appropriate for long-term maintenance of the body. And you can't accept that. Once you've embraced the vegan identity, it's really hard to get out of it. So mostly people like me get out of it because we do permanent damage to our bodies, and we get very, very tired of the pain and the exhaustion and the general day-to-day, like, why does this suck so bad? And eventually it collapses on you, and then you're sort of left in the rubble, and then you have to look outside for other answers. But in the meantime, you're also very aware that you're going to lose most of your friends, which is what happens. You have to leave your community because there's no room for this in the vegan world.
One question that I have for you, and I just reread your book when I took a long road trip last weekend, 2 weekends ago. And one question that I have for you is that, did you enter being a vegan because of the health benefits, or did you enter it because of the culture of it, so to speak?
For me, it was kind of three-pronged. I became a vegan because I met another teenager who was a vegan. And that is the number one way that people get converted to vegetarianism. They meet somebody who's already doing it, and they are convinced. And I was 16 years old. I was idealistic. I was very compelled by thoughts of injustice and how I was going to change the world. And I mean, honestly, none of that has changed. Those are still the values that motivate my life. It's just at age 16, I didn't know better. Like, I had no idea where food came from. So when I met this other teenager her whole family was vegan, I was just utterly taken in by this. And, she's very compelling arguments about it all, and brochures. And I mean, you can't look at those pictures of the factory farming animals and not feel the horror of that. So it was very compelling to me. And within 2 weeks of meeting her, I was like, that's it, I'm going to be a vegan. And I did not look back for 20 years. I mean, it was all embracing. So good.
So now let me ask you, what kind of diet did your parents have you on growing up?
Yeah, we were just like standard American diet. Like, there wasn't really anything particular. My mother was fairly good about not letting us eat too much just out and out sugar junk. Like, we never had soda. And we didn't have candy bars except, at like Halloween or something. So she wasn't like super strict about stuff, but there was a lot more junk food in other people's houses than there was ever in my house. So I think as that sort of standard diet goes, we did better than a lot of people. But there's limited information out there, especially at that point. And I think there's a lot of things that maybe now people would do different. Though I will say that she was always a believer in butter. Like, she hated margarine. She just knew that was absolutely evil. And she was right. But she was very upset when I became a vegan. We had a lot of fights about it. And I mean, she cried herself to sleep over it because she just knew that I was going to do damage. And as it turned out, she was completely correct. So I did have to apologize to her 2 decades later. Mom, you were right. But, you know, which is definitely the sign that you're middle-aged now, because you can say you were right to your parents.
How did she instinctively know that you were going to do damage to your body? Because, you know, I grew up in the 70s and 80s, right? I got out of high school in 86. And, you know, for me, it was the food pyramid.
Right.
And I didn't know that being a vegan, because I did meet a few vegetarians, at least when I was growing up, that were friends of the family. And I never thought it was good or bad. It was just another way to eat. But to me, it was just, I'm just told in school that I had to eat according to the food pyramid, but I didn't know that doing differently would be detrimental. We had margarine in our diet only because it was supposedly cheaper. I don't know. I think butter's actually cheaper, but yeah. But I didn't eat a lot of junk food. My mom just knew, just don't give me a lot of candy, and I didn't drink a lot of soda. But that was really to the extent of my good eating habits growing up.
So I was born in 1964, so I'm a little older than you. Mm-hmm. And my mother, you know, she was born in 1942. And I think at that point, I mean, we forget this, but there was still a basic knowledge about what was good for children, for food, for nutrition. And those would be the traditional foods that had always kept human beings healthy. All of that got destroyed in the 1970s with the McGovern Commission, when they, you know, tried to investigate this sort of rise in heart disease and what could have caused that. And, you know, it was all very politicized, and they came up with the food pyramid. That was all behind the scenes. It was very political because people running it, the one guy especially, was in fact a vegetarian, and he was trying to get, you know, his political ideology, you know, spread across America. And he actually did it because that food pyramid held for a good long time. But people who were born before that and who grew up before that, I think just had, you know, just absorbed from the culture around them that the good foods are animal protein, animal fat. What you eat for breakfast is bacon and eggs. Mm-hmm. By the time I was growing up, almost nobody ate bacon and eggs anymore for breakfast. But in my mother's generation, that was still what you ate for breakfast. So I think that there was just sort of a native loyalty to those foods that everybody experienced, that those built health, and that people who were poor didn't have enough access to them, and therefore their children weren't going to be as sturdy, and they weren't going to have good teeth, and they weren't going to be as smart. And it's because they didn't have things like eggs and bacon for breakfast. They didn't have full-fat dairy. They had, you know, cheap knockoffs and, you know, sort of wretched carbohydrates and not much else. And everybody could see the difference in the children that all of that got lost.
Yeah.
You know, sometime in my mother's childhood, that information started to be, you know, sort of stuff that people forgot, and sort of the rage to be modern and to eat, you know, sort of scientific foods, and everything was prepackaged and, you know, on shiny shelves in the supermarket, and everything was going to be, you know, sort of futuristic, and all of that just sort of got left behind. That the only people who cared about that would be sort of rural farmers who were essentially hicks and weren't up to speed on anything. So I think there were a lot of sort of cultural pressures that got people to abandon those traditional foods. But I think in my mother's, you know, still in the back of her mind, she got that kids needed things like milk and butter and meat to be healthy. And I gave them all up, and she just knew that was not going to be a good idea.
You brought that story up about your mom, and and it's kind of funny because your mom and you got into all these battles about your becoming a vegan, but yet at the end of the day, she had the last word, because it was her declining health that caused you to do the research that brought you back to what she had originally brought you to. And then now here you are, an advocate for a carnivore type diet. But so your worldview has been kind of tilted a little bit. You know, part of the reason why you became a vegan, and you're now, you know, you're still, you know, you still have I guess the beliefs that you mentioned that you always had them, but now you just take it from a different angle because you were kind of changed. And in a way, and I know that you had mentioned that you've kind of wrecked your body, but I'm always of the belief that our previous life experiences were put there on purpose so that we can do what we do later in life. And you know, I think you're doing a great thing by reaching out to, by using this book. You're reaching far more people than you could have reached if you didn't write the book. But you wouldn't have written the book had you not gone through the life experience you went through.
Yeah. I mean, it's no matter which way you come to look at it, it's like you have to just play the hand you're dealt. So you can make good things out of your you know, your hardships and your traumas, or you can just wallow in them. And it just doesn't do any good to just sit around and feel sorry for yourself.
Yeah.
It's way better to just take those experiences and think, well, what did I learn? If there's something I can do to help other people, you're always going to have a more positive outcome.
Yeah. Now,
just
were you an author? Are you an author by training and career, or did you do other stuff and you just happen to write books on the side?
No, mostly what I've done is be a writer. There's not much else that I've done. A couple other little things, but that's mostly my thing.
Got it. So now let's go back to where you said you made the transformation when you were 16 and at a friend's house, and 2 weeks later you had become vegan. Did you feel any health benefits? Did you feel better about anything in your body, whatever, in the first, 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years, whatever?
I think in the first maybe 2-3 months, I did feel a little bit better. And I think that is probably true for a lot of people, because there's some things that you stop eating when you take up that kind of sort of vegan health food thing. There, you stop eating white flour and most of us anyway, kick out the white flour and the white sugar. So there's some things that you're going to make better choices about. And so that probably helped a little bit, like just not eating any cookies or anything like that was probably a good thing. But pretty soon after that, I started to get really bad blood sugar issues. So I would get that terrible crash, the blood sugar crash. And I didn't know what it was. I just knew that I felt very compelled to put food in my mouth in a way that I never had before. And that's clearly just, the insulin surge, and then everything gets cleared out of your bloodstream, and now your blood sugar is too low. So you have to eat again, back up. But of course, when you're only eating carbohydrate, it's now too high. So now you get another insulin rush. Too much happens, it drops back too low. So insulin is a really blunt mechanism. And this is one of the reasons that we know for a fact we're not meant to eat a diet of carbohydrate. It's not a finely tuned kind of process. It just wham, take everything. If there's too much blood sugar in your blood, you get this surge of insulin from your pancreas. It grabs onto absolutely everything that's in your bloodstream as fast as it can, and it shoves it into the cells for storage. The reason for that is that it's a biological emergency. Our brains especially can only function within a really narrow range of blood sugar. So too high or too low, and you literally can die. And your body knows that. So you eat too much carbohydrate, too much sugar of any kind, and you're going to get that insulin surge. So then insulin comes to the rescue. It grabs everything, shoves it out of the way. But of course, it's too much. So now your blood sugar is too low. And that's what I was experiencing, was the too low moment. And it would just be this intense crave. Like I had to put food in my mouth. And that's true. My blood sugar was too low. I was experiencing actually what that was. But you do that over and over again every single day, 3, 4, 5 times a day. And you're going to destroy your insulin receptors, because they're just not meant to take that kind of thing. We're not supposed to just be eating sugar all day long. If it makes you feel better to call it complex carbohydrate, you can go ahead. But it is just sugar at the end of the day. What happens in your digestive tract is that those complex carbohydrates are broken down into simple sugars. That's how it's absorbed into your through the brush border into your body. So it's all broken down into simple sugars. Like, it doesn't actually matter whether it's more complex when you eat it. And I didn't know that at age 16. I had no idea what was going on. I just knew that all of a sudden I was like, oh, I have to eat. I'm shaking. I'm crying. Why do I need food so badly? And that went on for 20 years. Like, I never twigged to the fact that this was maybe a bad idea. Part of the reason is that, my whole social circle, we were all doing some version of this kind of diet. We all had to eat every 2 hours. It was like built into the schedule. Like, oh, we're going to need a snack in an hour or two, and then we're going to need another one, and then we're going to have lunch. Like, everybody knew this was just what being alive was. And it's not till you get out of that world that you're like, wow, you people cannot go 4 or 5 hours without eating. Then you remember how bad it felt. Like, no, they can't, because they're eating mostly carbohydrate. This is the roller coaster that they're on. They don't know this isn't normal. So I didn't know. I just accepted that this was normal life. So it was a lot of snacking, sort of semi-constantly, which only made it worse.
this is all very fascinating to me, and it really interests me about how people kind of go through life and how they come to where they come now. So I'm 52, so you're born in 64. That makes you, this year you're going to be
56. I just had my birthday. So.
Oh, happy birthday, by the way.
Yeah, thank you.
So now I understand you mentioned the lifestyle and everything. So you got into it because of the lifestyle, because of your friendships and all that. But at what point, and I know that you just kind of felt horrible for all those years, at what point did you decide to do your research? Because your book has a lot of research in it that I think you had to do first to have you lay a foundation for finally making the jump off. Does that sound about right?
Partly. I started to do some of it when I was still a vegan. A lot of it, you know, there's this sort of ideological barrier where there's a whole bunch of stuff I could have learned and I didn't, because that you come up to that precipice of, uh-oh, this is now going to threaten my vegan identity. Past this line, I cannot go. So there's all this information that I'm sort of collecting sort of around the edges of my life, and none of it could I really engage with. And this was on every level. It was, you know, trying to figure out environmentally, what have we done to the planet and why? Like, why are we wrecking the only home we have? And at the end of the day, the answer really is agriculture. But I couldn't face that as a vegan. I just couldn't, because those were the foods I was eating. Those had to be the good foods, you know, the foods of peace and justice and kindness and compassion. And like, that's not true, but I couldn't face it. So there's like all of this historical research that I'm trying to understand. And again, I would hit that line of just, oh, I don't want to know this. So I would sort of set it aside. And the same was true about the nutritional stuff. So my mother was very badly diabetic in the last few decades of her life. And I was trying to do research for her to figure out, well, what could she do that would be better? And I stumbled upon, at that point, there were already a whole bunch of books about eating a low-carb diet and why that's good. So I started reading them for her to try to figure out, you know, what I could do to support her. And I suddenly realized, like, wow, I have every single one of these symptoms. So there's actually a name for this, like, constantly needing to snack problem that I have and feeling so crappy all the time. And it's because I'm eating this really high carb diet with not enough fat. So that was really shocking. So the last 2 years that I was a vegan, I tried to do that eating low carb. And trust me, it's ridiculous. But I did feel better, at least cutting back on some of the carbohydrate. I mean, there's nothing left to eat at that point. It's mostly like peanut butter. But, you know, I did my best.
You?
What's that?
Which some contend is also not that good for you.
No, it's not. It's terrible. It gives me a stomachache every time I eat it. So for reasons that I now understand. But at the time, I was like, well, what else is there to eat? I can eat nuts. I can eat peanut butter. That's about it, really. There's not much else that's low carb and also vegan. But that was sort of the first tripwire that I hit, where I suddenly realized I have been doing some pretty bad damage by eating this diet. And I can see what's happened to myself. And even 3 or 4 days eating a more low carb diet, it was extraordinary how much better I felt. And it was it was really great to feel better, like not to be on that constant roller coaster and to feel calm and happy. But it was absolutely terrifying. Like, so if this is true, what else have I done to myself? And then, of course, you know, you can't help it. You start sort of mulling over all the other weird health problems that you have, some of which are quite serious. And that's when it, you know, you start to let the information in. Okay, so maybe this wasn't so great. Some of it's hard because, you know, in the case of me or anybody like me who's done this long term, you're likely going to have permanent damage. And you then have to face the fact that you've completely destroyed your life for the best of reasons. I mean, I thought I was doing a good thing for animals and for the earth, but it's hard knowing that, you know, you're going to be in constant pain for the rest of your life because you destroyed your joints or your spine or whatever it was that went, because something's going to go. The rubber hits the road and you're going to end up with damage if you do it this long. So yes, so part of it I did stumble upon while I was still a vegan. I tried to make adjustments. It wasn't good enough, though it did, you know, I did get some benefit from it. And then eventually the day came when I just had to give the whole thing up.
And what year was this that you gave it all up?
2000. Year 2000.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're 20, 21 years now, just eating however you eat right now. And and you feel better. You look, you know, when you first came on board, I'm looking at you, I'm thinking, you're beautiful. And
Oh,
I'm looking at your hair, I'm thinking your hairstyle, I'm thinking, okay, you know, that I'm not sure how would you, and then you wrote the book, you know, several years ago. And I'm thinking, you know, I always try to piece people's age
sure,
together.
of course.
Ask. But as soon as you said I was born 1964, then I'm like, okay, you know, okay, I get it. So I'm born 68. All right, fine. So, but it's, do you feel, you know, I've seen some people, I mean, and then maybe they don't eat well or something, and you can see age in them.
Yeah.
Whereas people who have a good diet and they exercise, they're overall healthy, but diet in particular, their skin is very vibrant. And when you see that, it's obvious. Like, what are you doing? Right. You know, that's the kind of things I think about. Because, you know, this camera's resolution is actually pretty good, and I can see all the wrinkles in here, and I don't kind of like it all that much, but but you know, I just kind of accept it for what it is. But another thing, so the story is fascinating to me, what's been going on with your transformation. Now, what are some of the research, or what is some of the research that you had come into that bolsters your transition out of veganism? Stuff that made you change your entire worldview on how to eat, and stuff that inevitably led, and you knew it was going to lead to you losing a circle of friends and having to make a new circle of friends, which I don't know if that's bad. Sometimes, you know, we have our friends, and these friends take us to a certain point in life, and then it's time to move on and create a new circle of friends. You know, these people, you know, they were good for me to know at this point in time in my life, but now I need to move on. I mean, I don't know how you look at it. I mean, that's the way I look at things, but, you know, we're probably 100% different a lot of times. So.
No, it's hard because for a lot of us who came out of that vegan world, like, we knew that leaving that vegan diet, that if we decided to eat animal products, for a fact, we were going to lose friends. And that is kind of scary, that in fact we are that conscious of it, that we know that our friends are going to abandon us over something like what we eat. And you have to wonder, like, that's a very cult-like mentality. I mean, it's not a healthy place to be in. You know, to be treating people, you know, with such kind of black and white thinking that, you know, if you don't do exactly this the way I say, that you're not worth being friends with at all. I can't be friends with people that I don't have some disagreements with. Like, that's not a healthy adult way to move in a world that's made up of so many different kinds of people. You know, that you can't even take a tiny bit of difference and still be friends. Just get over it. It's not a good place, and that's one of the ways that you know that it's not a healthy diet, because it leads people into a kind of mental state that's not terribly resilient. And I mean, I say this from my own experience. Like, if I couldn't find my wallet, I would be lying on the floor crying. I mean, it's like there's no balance in that brain. And now I know it's because you don't have any serotonin, like, because there's not enough tryptophan in the diet. So there's like all these sort of precursors to our neurotransmitters are not there because you're not eating what we need. Like, you can't make tryptophan on your own. You have to eat it. It's one of the essential amino acids, and that's where we make our serotonin from. So not having any in your diet means you're just never going to be happy. You're going to be miserable, angry, upset, and there's just like there's no resilience in there. Like the tiniest thing happens and you're just a mess. And that was daily life, you know, when I was a vegan, and I saw it in all my friends, and we all thought it was normal. You just sort of accept it. I actually was in a correspondence with a young guy who had been a vegan, and his girlfriend had been a vegan, and they did it for 2 years, and they just wrecked themselves. And then she got out of it because she found my book. And so they wrote to me, and they were like, "Oh, thank God, you know, you saved our lives." It was one of those really, really sweet emails. But in the meantime, when he was a vegan, he worked in a vegan bakery in Portland, Oregon, which is, of course, is one of the vegan centers of the world. And he loved working. He was so excited. We're going to move to Portland. We're going to have this new life. We're going to know all vegans. And he goes to work in this bakery. And he said every single day between 2 and 3 in the afternoon, every single day, people came in and they ordered these cookies that had this like thick layer of sugar on top, like just straight up sugar icing, just right. It was just like a wad of sugar, and they would come in every day. There was a line of people who wanted that cookie with that sugar, and they would all be crying when they were standing in line. It was like every single day they were crying or screaming, like having some kind of a fit of just absolute rage about God knows what. And he went home one day and he said to his girlfriend, "This isn't normal. Like, before we were vegans, nobody behaved like this. Like, what? There's something wrong with all of us. And it's like, yes, you're right. It's the blood sugar crash, that mid-afternoon when you've eaten nothing but sugar all day. And of course they're craving sugar. It's the only way they're going to feel better. But they're going to be crying and screaming because your brain just can't function. So anyway, yes, that's a real issue. Like, if you're going to lose your friends. But the other problem, of course, is just that when you're in that kind of a world, like, everything around you that would tell you that what you're doing is wrong, you've cut it out, because you're in this sort of semi-cult environment. Like, I'm not going to listen to you because you're not a vegan. You can't possibly know. You don't understand. We're going to save the world, and we're the only people who have the truth. And so there's no way in, until something collapses. There's not a way in. So I feel like, the best way through, honestly, is just to just keep them encircled with better information and better people, and showing them like what real health is, so that the young people they have to get through us to get to them. So they're going to get the better information first. So that's one thing. But the other thing is, those people, one by one, they are going to collapse. Like, there's no way they're going to do this to the end of their lives. And at that point, when they turn away from that little inner circle, they'll find us and they'll say, I've been there, know how hard this is. You will feel better. But there's a bad day when you have to start eating meat. There's just going to be that bad day. And I'll hold your hand, but you have to do it.
Mm-hmm. So what they were experiencing in that bakery, is that what you would call getting or being hangry?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
It's being super hangry. But on top of that, I think a lot of people who get that kind of the blood sugar, there's sort of a background level where they're still eating at least some animal products. So they have some fat and some protein that's at least getting their brains a little bit like in shape. But when you're eating vegan, you don't even have that background of sort of basic good health in your brain. It's all gone. You've depleted all of it. Like, everything that happens in your brain is either fat or protein. So your brain itself is almost 80% fat.
Yeah.
Okay. And it's like saturated fat, people. It's animal fat. That's what it is. And so you have the neurotransmitters, and then you have the receptors. And the receptors are all made literally from cholesterol. Okay. That's ultimately where they get. And then the transmitter, the little thing that actually makes the synapse, is the protein. So it's usually tryptophan or some, serotonin or one of the others. But all of those are made from protein. So without fat and without protein, you don't have a brain that functions. You don't have the receptors, and you don't have the transmitters. So what can your brain do? Like, it does its best, but there's no way you're going to have a happy, stable mood state without any of what your brain needs. And in fact, the research shows, people who eat a vegan diet, their brains shrink. Your brain is 5% smaller than it should be. Like, literally just shrinks because there's not enough to build with it. Like, so that's horrifying. I mean, this is like millions of years went into evolving these brains, and just by eating the wrong thing, you can shrink it. And God knows that damage is permanent. I don't feel like I ever really recovered from some of this, especially because I started so young. Like, I think I would still be a better, more decent, more calm person if I had never done this as a teenager. And I am very frightened for the teenagers when I hear about this. Like, oh, my daughter is doing, it's like, oh, just let her build a brain first. Like, do it when you're 25 if you have to, but you just got to get through all that stuff that's happening to the adolescent brain, the myelinization. Like, that's what makes you an adult. And if you don't give your brain the basic building blocks, it's never going to get there. So it's terrifying.
So in the last 2.5 to 3 minutes, I just learned a ton about the tryptophan, protein, all this kind of stuff. And, I didn't know that. I mean, I knew that cholesterol was essential for the brain, but I didn't really know how or why. Now, and the same with the tryptophan and the serotonin and all that. I knew all that exists, but how, I don't know. So now let me ask you this. So let's say, all that is built at some point, and then you become a vegan. Does that just go away or deteriorate over time and you need to replenish it? I mean, it's like a wearable part. Or is it once it's there, it's there? And then, the brain decreasing only leads me to believe that I guess there are some parts in our brain that is wearable. It wears out and we need to replace it, and we don't have the diet to replace it. Then we can't maintain that mass in our brain. Does that sound about right?
Yep. That's exactly what's happening. You're on like drawdown of your own nutritional stores, and eventually they're gone if you do this diet long enough. And then you're just limping along. It's, your body's going to do whatever it can to keep you alive. So some nutrients are going to get shunted to the most important parts of you. So, your body's going to do everything it can to keep your brain going, because without that, you will die. So, your brain moment to moment uses 25% of the energy in your body, just feeds this. Like, that's how nutrient heavy, that's the load that we've got up there. And there was a trade-off. I mean, evolutionarily speaking, this is how we know that we are carnivores. What happens in the archaeological record is the brain gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and the digestive tract gets smaller and smaller and smaller until eventually you have modern humans. And that's a trade-off. That's an evolutionary trade-off, where the only way you're going to have this great big organ with far smaller digestive tract is if you're eating really nutrient-dense food. So it's quite clear that the only way you're going to do that is by eating meat. You're going to have to eat the most nutrient-dense food that's out there. And that's especially the organ meats, which of course have fallen out of favor in modern times. But there's no traditional people that do not eat the organ meats. They're often considered sacred. They're prepared in very special ways. Some of them are always eaten raw. And that's like cross-culturally what people do. And everybody knows what those sacred special foods are. And we don't do that anymore in modern life. But those are the foods we really need. So we should all be eating heart and liver and, stuff like that. And it's, a little bit gag worthy at first if you didn't grow up eating them, but that's the real core of it. Like, so muscle meat is anywhere from 10 to 100 times more dense than any plant material you can think of. Like, that's how much more nutrients are in there. But then if you go to organ meats versus muscle meat, it's the same, 10 to 100 times more nutrient dense. So that's really what we should be eating. And that's mostly because we have these giant brains that need that level of nutrition. And it's the only way we're going to get it. We traded that off a long time ago. We're not orangutans that just eat leaves. They have little tiny brains, and those huge barrelly, look at just the barrel size of those kinds of primates. It's because they have this gigantic digestive tract, because they're only leaves. So like cows, they have that huge barrel. That's what's going on in there. And we don't have that shape. We are very slender. Yeah. As primates go, we are meat eaters. That's just the nature of it.
So what about the people that claim that we're omnivores?
So omnivore isn't actually a biological category of animals. There's various levels of carnivores, and then there's various levels of plant eater kind of, the herbivores, but there's not actually a biological classification that's omnivore. We can certainly handle some plant matter, there's no question, but most of what's provided in plants is actually indigestible, and you can call that fiber, but we can't digest it. We don't have a mechanism. It's cellulose is what it is, and we don't have a way to digest that. So you could contrast that with, say, a cow or a buffalo, an actual ruminant. They have 4 stomachs. And what's going on inside there is completely different as to what goes on inside a human body. It's actually, I think, really fascinating. That buffalo is not actually eating the grass. They're feeding that grass to the bacteria that lives inside their rumen. And it's the bacteria that actually do the digestion. And then that ruminant is eating protein and fat-rich bacteria bodies. So it's a 3-way symbiotic relationship, because you have bison, you have the bacteria, and then you have the grasses. You have the actual prairie, the grassland, that home, that place. And all 3 of these creatures are needed for any of them to exist. The grass has to be grazed or it will die. The bacteria needs to live inside the rumen of that buffalo because it can't survive outside. It's too dry in a prairie, in a grassland landscape. It's too dry. And that's where the ruminant did. It evolved this way to carry around that bacteria that could keep the process of life moving for the entire community. They can't survive on the surface because it's too hot and too dry in the summer. So the ruminant took it inside and said, I'll carry you around, but you do this for me. You make food for me and I will feed you. So again, these are not relationships that are exploitative. This is what nature is. It's just these constant interconnecting webs of different life forms cooperating together. Now they're eating each other. I'm not pretending there's no death here, but at the end of the day, they're all alive because of it. And there's more life at the end of every year because of it. So, the grassland will eventually eat the bison when they die. They get reabsorbed into the soil like we all do. But in the meantime, you've got this sort of three-way partnership between the grasses, the ruminants, and bacteria. But that's how cellulose gets digested, is by bacteria doing it. And other animals as well that eat things like deer eat browse, or like the orangutans eating the leaves, whatever it is. It's the bacteria inside their bodies that are actually doing the digestion. And we don't have that kind of stomach. I mean, we all know just, intrinsically that you can't go outside and eat grass and call that breakfast.
Yeah.
Like, we all know that that's not going to feed us. We don't even bother to try it because it's so silly. Like, we all know we can't digest it, and you can't. I mean, you could chew it and swallow it, but it'll just come out the other end. And so we call that fiber, but it's cellulose. We don't have a mechanism to break it down or to get nutrients out of it in any way. So that's the difference between us and kind of ruminants, but you can see it in even just the shape of our bodies. We don't have those. We don't have 4 stomachs. We've got one. It's highly acid, which kills off bacteria. Their stomachs, that rumen, is very neutral because it's an environment in which bacteria thrive, and they can't survive in an acid environment. So it's a completely different kind of digestion that they have to us.
Speaking, it's funny you mentioned the chewing of the grass and stuff, which kind of leads me to, back about 15 or 20 years ago, I used to frequent this one pretty famous juice bar. You'd see it everywhere you saw a Starbucks. And, because I'd always have to get my orange dream machine every day.
Sure.
Green tea, whatever it was. But I'd see people ordering these shots of wheatgrass.
The wheatgrass, yeah.
I'm looking at that. I'm like, that never did look appetizing to me. By the way, I didn't feel really good. I thought I did. I thought I felt good having one of those as a meal replacement every day. Until when I moved to Texas, then I didn't really have access to those anymore because there's like one. In the area I live, whereas before there'd be one on every street corner.
Right.
So I didn't really have the time to go anymore. And I stopped and I immediately gained about 15 pounds. And I'd see pictures of myself back when I lived in California and I looked skinny.
Yeah.
It's just like I picked up 15 pounds right away. And I thought my waist didn't get any bigger. I didn't pick up any body fat, but somehow I picked up 15 pounds. I don't know what it was. And I think it was just kind of what you're talking about, kind of just triggered me that, wait a minute, I used to drink that juice place a lot of times, like 2 times a day. Now I don't, but it made me think about the cow and the grass and the wheatgrass and how disgusted I was with that. Just watching, like, how can you drink that stuff? But I think people religiously do it and then shot of orange juice after that. I'm like, okay, I mean, whatever works for you, right? I
mean, you can try it. I did try wheatgrass juice when I was a vegan, and it was gross. It was gag-worthy stuff, and I did it for about 2 weeks. Like, I did one of those fasts. Everybody said, this is the best thing to try. I was like, maybe this will help my health problems. It was terrible, and I honestly couldn't eat lettuce for about a year afterwards, just because the taste of that little bit of the taste of chlorophyll that's in lettuce reminded me so strongly of that horrible wheatgrass experience. It was like, I literally couldn't eat lettuce afterwards for a while because it was so bad. It's nasty. Anyway, I don't recommend it.
I wanted to cover 2 more topics. One of them was a fascinating analogy you made between the brains in a human versus the brain in, well, I don't know if it was a gorilla or orangutan or whatever, orangutan, but talking about how, so one of the things that's been brought up in my world is people talk about how, a silverback gorilla is, this is the strongest primate in the world. And, all they eat are bananas and grass or whatever. Whereas humans, we eat meat and we're more frail and we're weaker than the gorilla, but yet the gorilla is much stronger, more powerful. So maybe we should eat like a gorilla. And that's what I thought until I read your book. And then you had mentioned a good reason why, we don't.
Well, again, think about a gorilla. Like, they've got that huge barrel trunk and then little tiny arms and legs. And why they have that is because they have this completely different, huge digestive tract, so that they can process all that cellulose. So again, it's a vat for bacteria in there. And that's why they have that huge barrel-shaped body, is it just takes that much space to house all those bacteria inside that specialized organ that can actually do something with leaves. We don't have that. So, I mean, it's kind of silly to even pretend that we're this, it's not going to work. I mean, if people want to go outside and try to eat leaves and grass for breakfast, I mean, you can try it. I think we all know ahead of time that's not going to work. You're not going to extract any nutrition from that stuff. You can't.
So
you just don't have the bacteria to do it.
Correct.
And then the brain size. Yeah, I mean, our brains are just, I don't even know, 2 times, 3 times as large as the other primates. And, it's an incredible thing, the human brain. Like, evolutionarily speaking, how we got from here to there is pretty incredible. And, it's given us some really amazing capacities. And I'm glad I have one. It's been a good experience being alive. But the other primates don't have brains anything like ours. Ours do require 25% of our daily moment to moment, the energy that we need is for our brains. And the other primates don't have brains anywhere near that large. I think ours are 3 times larger than chimpanzees. So it's twice or 3 times. So it's not the same at all. I mean, we're related to them, but it's not, we're not the same creatures as they are. So we've all got our specializations, and it's, it's a cool thing to see all the variations in life, but we're not them. And we have very different bodies, including different brain sizes. So.
Okay, then one thing I wanted to also touch on is something you had just touched on about 5 minutes ago, and it had to do with the relationship between the animals, the bacteria that eats the grass in the plains. Now, you made some very eye-opening notes in your book about how at one point most of the United States that had grasslands had 12 feet of soil, topsoil on it, and now we're depleted down to inches. But had we just simply maintained our normal diet and just fed on wildlife and all that, just let whatever happen, we would still have all that surface area that's healthy on our Earth, on our planet. But because of the I guess the demands of agriculture, which you touched on about 20-30 minutes ago, I was wondering if you could kind of expand on that whole thing about agriculture and whether your feelings about agriculture are the same today as it was 25 years ago.
Yeah, so this was definitely one of those little cliffs that I approached as a vegan and just couldn't absorb. And I remember even being 20 years old in college, and I took a really interesting class that was called The Politics of World Hunger. And I thought I understood all of this because I was a vegan. And I mean, I had everything completely wrong. And I remember the professor saying this sentence that just absolutely destroyed my world. He said, the moment you put a plow to soil, you degrade that soil. And the problem was I could immediately see what was going on, that if in fact agriculture is destructive, and here's a scientist telling me this is true, if that's destructive, we've got this massive problem because there's all these people, they're dependent on us doing this activity, agriculture, to provide them with food. But every time we do it, we're destroying the land. So now we have to take more land and do the same thing to it to feed all these people. But we're destroying that land now too. Now we have to take another piece of land. There's only so many square miles on planet Earth. It's finite. At a certain point, we're going to get to the end of this. And what then? It's just going to be mass starvation. And as it turns out, yes, that is what happens. There have been 32 civilizations on this planet. And civilization is a way of life based on agriculture. It's a totally different living pattern than anything that's come before. We all take it as normal now because we live inside it, but it's not, in fact. Most of our time on planet Earth, hunter-gatherers. We were not agriculturalists. So this has been the last, maybe 8,000 years we've been doing this one activity. So anyway, 32 places around the world started doing this at various times over the last bunch of thousand years. And every single one of them has ended in collapse. And this is why. They only last between 800 and 2,000 years. They last as long as the soil lasts. Eventually the soil gives out, and then the society, it collapses inwards. It's destroyed. And what they find in those final cooking pots are human proteins. So it ends with cannibalism, where people are that desperate that they're going to eat each other. And that's what the archaeological record shows over and over again. And we think we found a way out of it because in 1950, that marks the beginning of what's called the Green Revolution. So way back at the beginning of the 20th century, there was the scientist who invented this thing called the Haber-Bosch process. And this was Haber, was his last name. It's a way to extract usable nitrogen from oil and gas, essentially. And they used it for making bombs in World War II. Then the war is over, and they convert all of those bomb-making factories to fertilizer factories. Because for 100 years before that, scientists had been very, very concerned. They realized that, A, we're using up all the topsoil by doing agriculture. What are we going to feed people when this is over? Like, we're going to hit this, we're going to fall off a cliff as a species. Like, what are we going to do? So there was this mad scramble to figure out where are we going to get nitrogen to grow all the crops, because we've used it all up in the soil. And along comes the Haber-Bosch process. I mean, yay, the problem is solved. Well, the problem is oil and gas are also finite. Like, they don't reproduce themselves. Like, the end is still going to come. We've just made the problem way worse. So they invented this thing, the Green Revolution, where they hyperbred various agricultural crops like wheat and corn, and they made them really short with the biggest seed heads you could possibly imagine these little stumpy plants to have. They require an incredible amount of fertilizer and an incredible amount of water to grow them, but you can grow them, is the thing. So 1950, this whole new Green Revolution begins. More grain is produced than anybody could have imagined. Just mountains of the stuff is piling up everywhere, and immediately the human population quadruples. So the end is still inevitable to all of this. Like, you can't overshoot the planet. There's nowhere else to go. Mm-hmm. So this is going to collapse like every other previous civilization. It's just we keep making the problem worse by not facing it. So it's going to be the same. It's just now it's going to be 4 times worse because the population quadrupled. So it's one of the worst things that's ever befallen the planet. And nobody seems willing to talk about it, explore it, figure out how we could pull back from it. There actually are solutions. I don't even think it's that horrible, but we have to face reality before we can, try to discuss what solutions might pull us back from that brink. So that's what we've been eating. And it's because the planet's been skinned alive. Agriculture has taken every inch that it could on this planet and destroyed it. It's 98% of the world's grasslands and 99% of the world's old growth forests are gone. And the reason they're gone is because agriculture took them. So we are now growing humans on pretty much every square inch of land that they could be grown on, between the primary productive capacity and the secondary productive capacity of the planet. 80% of all of that goes to feed humans now. 80%. We've only left 20% for all the other species that also need a place to live. And even if you want to be completely human-centric and think, oh, well, we deserve all of this for reasons I don't understand, it doesn't matter because we can't create oxygen. I mean, we can't really do anything. We are second level consumers. Like, we can't produce the things that we need. And if we take out all the plankton and we take away all the plants in the forest, there literally will not be oxygen. Like, that's who makes oxygen for us. It's so short-sighted to think that somehow we can live without the rest of the planet being alive. They make everything for us, everything that we need. Food, water, all of it, oxygen, everything. And I don't know what people think is going to happen. Like, we're killing the oceans. Like, when there's the phytoplankton in the ocean, they create 2 out of 3 animal breaths are made possible by the oxygen that the plankton produce. And we are killing them all. Like, how is there a future in any of this? It just seems so insane to me. Mm-hmm. But you can't say it out loud because nobody wants to hear it. So anyway, that is true. We have destroyed all the topsoil. We have skinned the planet alive. And the reason we did this was with agriculture. Hunter-gatherers live inside their biotic communities. Like, they're a part of it, and they take their nutrition from inside it. Their way of life is based on it, and that's where they get their food, is from being one animal among many. And then along comes the agriculturalist, and it's completely different. You clear every single living creature off that land. Yeah. And then all you do is you plant it for humans. So that's the end point, is where we are now. We're at the end. I mean, there's no more land to take. We're using up all the oil and the gas. We've wrecked the climate. 200 species go extinct every day. And it's all because of this one way of life. I don't think this is human nature. I mean, for 2 million years, there was creatures more or less like us, and we didn't trash the place. We actually lived, I think, in a very reverent way. And I say that just from looking at the cave paintings. When you see the first art we ever made, it seems to me quite clear that these were paintings of Thanksgiving and very joyous wonderment at being alive. It's just, they're incredible paintings. And the little figurines everybody carved, and it just seems like, they were so thankful to be here. Like, our brains got big enough that we could make art. And the first thing we did was make art of reverence and thank you and gratitude. So it doesn't seem to me that we are naturally inclined to destroy our home. I think small children really embody that kind of biophilia, that love for the planet. I mean, all children love animals. All children love being outside and seeing trees and rivers and mountains and, you know, seeing the sunset. I mean, it's all just, they just clearly have a native love for our place, our home. And all of that gets destroyed, you know, as we're socialized into this culture. But I don't think it's human nature. And the first 2 million years of us on this planet shows that, in fact, we do know how to live in balance with all these other creatures. We've just completely forgotten that because agriculture is a completely different thing. And it's completely distorted our cultures and our religion and, you know, sort of our basic daily routine of what life should be. All of that has gotten kind of perverted into something else that's all about destruction now. I don't know.
So let me ask you a question as far as your personal diet. Are you a nose to tail carnivore?
I have been, I can be. I eat other things as well, but that is definitely something that I aspire toward. So I eat.
Do you eat fish?
I do eat fish. I live on the coast, so I have, in a very rural area. So I have access to really good fish. I have access to all kinds of really great grass-fed, you know, pasture-based farms. So beef. There's really great local pork I can get. There's all kinds of little poultry, backyard poultry people who sell eggs. I've had my own chickens. Well, I don't currently have chickens or ducks, but I have in the past. I've also had goats. So right now I have my dogs and that's about it, but it's really easy for me to just literally go down the street and get anything I need. There's people who produce grass-fed raw milk. We have a cheese factory in town. So there's raw grass-fed cheeses I can get really cheap. So, and just totally accessible to where I live. So I feel really lucky that I can eat a really great diet with, just no effort at all. It's all right there. Mm-hmm. And I do recommend everybody eat organ meats. I know that's a big ask, but once you get used to it, it's honestly not that bad. They're strong. The flavors are strong. So the first few times I did it, it was actually eating liver, and I froze it, and then I chopped it up really small, and then I just sort of gulped it without chewing it. But that really helps cut down on, there's like the ick factor of the chewing, and then there's the sort of overwhelming flavor of it. And by freezing it, you can cut down on both of those. So I didn't actually have to chew it. So it wasn't like a lot of tactile ick, and you can just sort of gulp it down, and you can get used to it that way is really my point. So I recommend that as like a first try, the first few times you do it. But some people, they take to it right away. They're like, oh, I'm so hungry for this, and I didn't even know it. I'm like, liver tends to have that effect on people. Like, this is like the good stuff, and it is. You just have to get used to the flavor. So, liver, heart, whatever. Like, I gave my roommate heart for the first time. She'd never had it. She's so into it now. Like, how can we get more of that heart? It was beef heart. Like, no, it's really good. Like, she had no idea, but it wakes up that primal hunger of just, this is what I need. I recommend that. And also, you can make great broth out of pretty much anything else that comes off a cow or a bison. Just cook up the bones, 24 hours, keep it boiling, and that's like the best stuff in the world. So broth is really, really key. Everybody should eat broth every day. And you can eat most of what's on an animal. You don't have to eat it all. You don't have to eat eyeballs. There's stuff there's no reason to ever eat it. But there's a lot of good stuff in there that we're just throwing away or giving to pet food factories or whatever. And it's the best stuff. It's like the most nutrient dense food, and we really do need it.
Now, do you tend to eat a higher fat diet, or do you stick with the lean meats?
Oh, mine's way higher fat. I feel so much better when I'm eating way more fat. I think that really is kind of human template, is probably 60 to 80% fat is probably ideal for most people, unless you have some other kind of medical condition that makes it hard to digest it. But generally speaking, that's what we should be eating.
And do you eat any vegetables at all?
I do. I don't mind vegetables too much. I like salad, actually, which I know is kind of weird. A lot of people don't. I actually enjoy salad. And there's other vegetables that I like. Like, I like beans, and I like peas, and I'm not big on kale anymore. I ate a lot of kale when I was a vegan, and I'm just like, why does anyone eat that? I just can't even anymore. But the thing I don't really eat is fruit, which is kind of weird, but I don't really like fruit. I don't know why people eat it. Like, if you're going to eat sugar, just eat chocolate. Like, I don't understand it. I don't crave fruit at all. So it's not even like, oh, I'm not going to eat it. It's not how bad. I don't care for it. I don't understand the purpose of fruit. So That's just not something I buy. So
I think it's just your palate, because I have 2 kids.
yeah,
My son doesn't eat fruit, but he eats
yeah,
vegetables, and my daughter doesn't eat vegetables, but eats fruit.
loves fruit. Yeah. How old are your kids?
My son's gonna be 20 in December, and my daughter's 15.
Oh, they're older. So
Oh,
for really little kids, there's actually a reason they don't like vegetables. And a lot of people don't know this, but until we're about 8 years old, the human body doesn't really have the capacity to absorb the vitamins that come inside vegetables. They're too hard to convert for us.
mhm.
And so that's the reason like a lot of kids don't like vegetables. They're not actually nutritionally terribly useful to kids. And then when they get older, a lot of kids develop more of a liking to vegetables. That's why, is because you actually can use the nutrients at that point. Up to that point, there's not even hardly any reason to give it to them. They can't really do much with it. The best way to get vegetables into a child is to pass them through a carnivore first, or an animal first, as they say. So give them to a cow and then give the cow to your kid. That's a way to get vegetables into your child.
I like
I know, right? But it didn't ever make sense to me until I heard somebody explain that. And I was like,
yeah.
well, that's why 4-year-olds hate broccoli. Like there's nothing in it for them.
Yeah.
All they're tasting is the anti-nutrients, and they can't get out what's good in there.
Yes.
Whereas meat and milk are highly digestible, so it's very simple. You can do it that way.
Now, is there a type of milk that you prefer? Because I hear that the milk that comes out of the Holstein, which is a black and white cow, is less digestible to humans than the milk that comes out of, say, a goat or out of a Guernsey cow, which is the brown and white ones. Is that you find any truth to that?
I think it's interesting. I don't really have like a strong position on it myself, but they talk about the A1 and the A2 cows. That's the difference.
Okay.
And a lot of people think the A2 is easier on people. I've had both. I've had raw milk that's from both kinds of cows, and I can't say that I experience a difference, but I'm also of far northern European extraction, and people from my background have been eating dairy almost as long as like there have been humans. So I don't have a problem eating any kind of dairy. I think probably if you're a different kind of human with a different ethnic background, it might really make a difference, because it seems to for some people. I tend to aim toward the A2 dairy just because I've heard it's so much better, and it looks interesting what I've read about it, and I can get that very easily from my local grass-based dairy. They only have the A2 cows, so it's like, well, might as well. It doesn't hurt anything to just buy that kind. But it's an interesting thing. I mean, there's a lot that's potentially wrong with those poor Holsteins. They've been overbred. They were all essentially bred from this one cow that was a genetic freak and could produce this huge amount of milk for no really good reason. But because the load was so huge, they went ahead and just kept making more cows like that. But, it's mostly going to be water at that point. There's only so much nutrition that any cow can get into milk when the volume is that huge. Whereas the more traditional breeds, like you're saying, the Guernseys or the Jerseys, the Swiss Browns or any of those, the Brown Swiss, it's much less milk, but it's so much denser. Like if you ever have the capacity to find that kind of milk where you live, get it, because it's like a third cream on top, and it's so good. I mean, there's flavor. You can just feel how much better it is for you when you drink it. It's just delicious, and it's got a beautiful, sort of creamy yellow color, and all of that's the nutrition. That's the vitamin A. What you're seeing in that color is the vitamin A, and that's why it's good. So, yeah, it's
and you
a lot to be said for it. Go ahead.
You mentioned raw milk earlier, and I drank raw milk once or twice, and both times I liked it a lot, and I felt great drinking it. So as a result, I just kind of put in my head, like, you know what? If I'm going to drink milk, I might as well drink the raw milk. So I don't drink pasteurized milk anymore.
Right.
Pasteurized to me, and maybe I'm wrong in it, but you end up killing all the good and the bad bacteria just so you can have milk, but then it's kind of an empty shell of itself and doesn't do you as much good. Is that true in your?
Yes.
Okay.
It destroys a lot of vitamins. So for instance, this is an interesting thing. By pasteurizing milk in the United States, we destroy as much vitamin C as is produced by the entire citrus crop of Florida. That's how much vitamin C should be in milk. And there's none because they pasteurize it. And the reason they pasteurize it, I mean, at the time, it might have been for the best, but it's because the dairies were so filthy. And there wasn't really modern sanitation, and there really weren't regulations about the cleanliness levels inside a barn. All of that's changed now. We have stainless steel tanks and, all kinds of ways to keep things basically clean and sterile. And, we have agencies that are supposed to give a stamp of approval after inspecting, and all of that could be brought up to standard. And then we wouldn't need to pasteurize anymore. So, a lot of the dairies that I have bought from, they're really good about every month doing the tests on their cows to make sure there's no TB or none of the other diseases. And they just give them a little blood test. And if a cow tests positive, she's removed until she tests negative. Like, you know what to do. And all of those should be regular practices in every single dairy, but they're not. And so instead, they just pasteurize everything. It's like, oh, well, it's going to be filthy, so we'll just boil it and it'll be fine, which is one way to handle it. But now you're destroying this incredibly life-giving fluid that should have way more nutrition in it. The other problem is that milk proteins are very fragile. So by applying the sort of flash heat that they use for pasteurizing, you're really denaturing some of those proteins. And that's why a lot of people find it hard to digest. Milk in its real form is a lot easier for people to digest, whereas the sort of strange thing that we've made of it, which doesn't exist in nature, is a lot harder, for good reason. It's not a thing that we've encountered, in our evolutionary past at all. It's like these strange new proteins. So it definitely can give people stomach aches and all kinds of problems, and even things like asthma and eczema and all this. I've seen dramatic kinds of improvements in children, especially when their parents switched to raw milk, grass-fed raw milk, and like within 2 weeks, the eczema's gone. And these are kids who have suffered for years, like, small children that have had eczema since they were 2, which has got to be miserable for a little kid. And then you just watch it evaporate because it's grass-fed raw milk. And it's like this miracle right before your eyes. Mm-hmm. But we're not doing ourselves any favor by hurting our milk. It's such a wonderful thing, and it's such a gift from the cows and the goats. And we should just have more respect. Like, it just seems so disrespectful to me that here's like, I don't know how, it's this life-giving fluid. It's milk. And what do? We put it through these like bizarre industrial processes, so it's barely digestible. But yeah, raw milk is a good thing. If you have any of these problems, like skin problems or, asthma or weird allergies, like, drinking raw milk can be an incredibly healing experience. I'm not going to say it's a panacea. Like, nothing works for everyone, but it's worth a try.
Okay. Why don't you go ahead and just tell us what you're up to today? Go ahead and mention your book as well as any other books that you've written or anything. Okay. People can contact you or read about you or read continuing works that you've done.
So the easiest way to find me, my website, is just to type vegetarian myth into your Google search bar. You can try my name because my website is just lierrekeith.com, but that's kind of a joke because I have a weird name. So you'd have to remember how to spell it, and most people aren't going to do that. So Vegetarian Myth, there's one book called that, and I wrote it. So you will find me if you just type that into your search bar. I've written other books too, and my newest book is coming out early next year. I wrote it with 2 friends, Derek Jensen and Max Wilbert, and it's called Bright Green Lies. And it's how the environmental movement has gotten sort of hijacked by technologies that aren't going to work. That are leading us down the wrong path to solve the problem of global warming. So that's what the book is about. Obviously, it's going to be controversial, but we spent 2-3 years writing it, and we're very proud of it. So Bright Green Lies, that'll be out probably in February next year. So.
Well, your first, I don't know if that was that your first book, The Vegetarian
No,
Myth?
I'd written 2 novels before that, but it doesn't matter. It was my first nonfiction book. That's why I'm like as famous as I know a tiny bit of fame, but I'm notorious for that book, is Vegetarian Myth. So that's what people think of when they hear my name.
I've never been afraid of controversy, and when I read that book, Vegetarian Myth, to me, I'm thinking, well, that's a pretty provocative title. Let me see what it's about. When I read it, like I said, it opened my eyes. I learned a lot from your book, and I really appreciate you for that. Which is why when I ended up doing an interview with one of my friends who's also done jiu-jitsu for decades, his body was kind of wrecked from what he had done to himself in his 20s. And one of the things he did was he went crazy vegan, talked about a book by a husband and wife, last name was Diamond. I forget what the book was, Eat Right for Your Type, was it? Oh, no, it wasn't that type. But he ended up going kind of overboard in the way he did things. And he said, yeah, my body's wrecked. And now he's a carnivore. And he feels a lot better. And just made me realize, wait a minute, I read your book. Let me see if I can get in contact with you. But I want to thank you for your time and your generosity in giving us this information and kind of giving us a little hint of what's in your book. Guys, you really need to get this book. It's really helped me a lot. We'll put a link in the description below, but also you can go to the website as well. And you will be benefited from it, I promise. Anyway, take care. Happy training. Bye-bye now.